Since I have no advice to give, I'd like to give you this piece of advice. Suggestion. Don't weaken just before there's a possibility of getting stronger. I don't know. Who knows what that means? If you'll keep in mind the fact that we established last time, that is, that it is the intellect's responsibility to see connections, then I thought we might press on a little more. I don't know any reason why. It's all been... But here we go, if you keep that sort of thing in mind. And get a clear picture of something that we were mentioning, and that is that it is only in man's unique... Of course, we're just talking about this planet. Forget all the ideas about other worlds right now, and heavens and hells, and where the Dante is still hiding out. But it is only in what is just man's unique world here on this planet. It is only there that there exist such things as connections, circumstances, and becauses. In the primary world, the way in which we have described it, as you recall, the primary world being even that, the world of primary intelligence also, because the world not only exists in a sense that you can observe it from a very crude but ordinary view, that is, an ordinary person can look out and know what I'm talking about the primary world. When I say the primary world is exemplified, as a matter of fact, by your dog at home or your cat. And then for me to say, in fact, you have something in common, without getting into all kinds of strange, dreamy, philosophical or anthropomorphical, inverted ideas. You simply do. At the primary level, creatures, sentient creatures operate on this planet, get along quite well, can raise hell, can threaten humans, but they do not have anything resembling what we're calling the secondary world. They do not have an operational intellect in the sense that humans do. They do not talk. They do not have a flexible memory. They do not have a verbal memory. So in the primary world, although it may seem otherwise, we're just getting very close to where the landscape is so contiguous that to talk about it is almost to sprain your ankle neurally. But knowing the brave souls that you are, and knowing that most of you don't give a tinker's damn about your chief ankles, here we go. In the primary world, there are no such thing as circumstances. They simply do not exist. Now, as always, there is ordinary reality to deny this. And it may be an ordinary reality that has never been verbalized up until now, but that will not stop us. The reality of it is known. Now, the specific verbalization that could be a naysay to this is based upon what would seem to be primary intelligence, primary creatures' reactions in life, the way in which they are plugged in to life's nervous system. But specifically what circumstances mean. Forget what the dictionary says. I'm going to try and get you to see that this is an area that is a reasonably useful map describing in an unknown way the way in which you, ordinary people, are plugged into life. And it's, amongst other words I could have chosen, but circumstances is quite far-reaching, if you will try and follow it in your own little head. Circumstances operate in a specific way. Operate now, not just verbally, but they operate. They represent a kind of energy, but they're operating in this sense. Circumstances act like a divider. Circumstances of all kinds operate as a divider, as in the opson, the and in the term cause and effect. The and is circumstance. Circumstance operates as a divider also, hiding behind its evil twin, the word because. Because every time you hear because, what you're hearing is the establishment, the recognition of a divider. It also, to get into areas more singular to us, to say the least, in my old equation of I plus not I, Circumstances are the plus in the equation. I plus not I equal everything. But circumstances are also the equal sign in the equation of I plus not I equals everything. It is operating as a divider. Now, to take ordinary intelligence's view to perhaps help bring this more into the potential visualization, a lion killing a zebra does not do so because of some circumstance. It does not kill a zebra and eat it because of any circumstances such as the circumstance that the lion is hungry. Now, that's what you would say if you were operating on the basis of trying to protect ordinary intelligence against the unreasonable, if not sloppy, onslaught of such as this. If you were taking its view, you would say, well, a lion kills its prey when it's hungry. It's because of those circumstances. It is not. There are no circumstances in the primary world that makes one creature do something else. No circumstance. Being hungry, let's take the lion's position, a primary creature, a creature with only primary intelligence. A lion killing a zebra, a lion being hungry, a lion staying alive is all the same thing. There is no division. In the primary world, there is no divider between the need and the fulfillment. There is no divider between the demand and the appropriate action. A lion does not go out and kill because of any connection to his circumstances of being hungry. There is no division between the two. There is no division whatsoever between action and thinking of action, since he cannot think. But if we take the difference between action and thinking of action, and in some way just leave thinking of action, put a blank and then put a parenthesis in the blank and put whatever it would be lion's thoughts if they could think. You can do that. Then when we use the term, the difference between acting and thinking of acting, even though a lion cannot think, remember, we've got at least something plugged in there parenthetically. Even if that were operational, it would not be operational, because there is no divider between what a lion would think if it could think, because the only thing it would think about would be primary stuff. And you're only talking about three. Not letting his end of the equation of I plus not I equals everything, that is the environment, the weather, and etc., kill him or her, and feeding, and checking into a lion motel every now and then to produce little lionettes. Sex, substance, and shelter. The lion, if it could think, what would it have to think about? Now, I know we were hitting on this last time, but I want you to, for a very good reason, to see clearly, because, of course, it's not just lions, it is operational in everyone. And it is not a direct connection between you and lions. I keep saying that, or no perfect parallel between you and dogs. I just say that. It's a damn perfect parallel. Other than the fact there's no parallel at all, it's not connected whatsoever. But never mind that, it is exactly connected. You have a lion in you, you have a dog in you, and you do not. So, therefore, I'm safe. And if you can think that way, then you can go, I'm safe. You have a bulletproof brain. You have an intellect then sitting up there on that big old stool with a thing over there that says, dunk the intellect, and nobody can hit it. Or you can be in the Wild West Saloon and you can tap dance faster than Gary Cooper, Alan Ladd, Henry Fonda, John Wayne, all staying there together with automatic weapons. Forget those old clumsy 38s. And you can dance faster. Nobody can hit you. But back to the main subject. If a lion could think, or at the primary level, if we could separate you from the secondary intelligence from the primary intelligence, and still they're both playing with reality, at least in a 3D sense, stretching it, and they were both still operational to the point that I can talk about them, and at least we could talk to each one. You know how this goes. If you don't, I can't. Stop and tell you that if you could see that, then you would understand in you not just a lion, At the primary level, if we could separate it to where you are not as ordinary people would have it, in some way psychologically influenced by your own personality. That is, you know what they believe in the city, such things as people eat too many sweets just so that they can get overweight, just so that they won't have to try and be attractive, just because of the connection between their bad relationship with their father or mother. So everybody knows that. That people subconsciously injure themselves so that they won't have to try and pursue some profession so that later they can't say, well, I failed at being a great guitarist. They don't have to say that because subconsciously they were driven to accidentally have an 18-wheeler run over their hand. They were down on the pavement looking for something, and so they could never play guitar again. In the city they believe all that stuff, and then they say that's good enough. But if we can separate that, and you can follow what I'm saying, at the primary level in you, if it could be separated, there are no circumstances tied between you and eating. At the primary level, it's not a circumstance. Do you understand? There is no division. You eat, and you're alive. You're not alive because you eat, and you don't eat because you're alive. There is no way to divide the two. And to do so is simply suicide. Fast or slow, but it's suicide. So, I was hoping that would help. The operations of a primary intelligence in you and a lion has no conception whatsoever of circumstance because there is nothing dividing. There is no space. There is no time gap. There is no division between the behavior and that which is life itself. Because at the primary level, all of your behavior is tied to being alive, if it were circumstantial. That's it. It is only in man's secondary world that there seems to be any division between thought and action. That there seems to be any possibility that there are circumstances that can directly affect your life. But this is absolutely foreign. It just does not exist. It could not even be described to primary intelligence. And if it could, of course, primary intelligence does not talk like we do, but back to our rubber reality, if it could, and I could speak to it, or you could, about circumstances, and whether you should think about what you're doing, and it was suddenly as intelligent as you are, it would say, are you nuts? What is there to talk about insofar as eating? We're not talking about dining now and all that. What is there to talk about staying alive, getting out of the elements? Now, we're not talking about where the primary intelligence wants a 2 or 3 bedroom condo. We're talking about staying alive. And there is no division. There is nothing to talk about. Any division between primary activities and staying alive. If there was any division, it is a form of suicide. Is this clear enough? I know it gets, I can tell by looking at your bills that it seems to come and go. But if a lion can't think like this, is hungry, and there goes a zebra, and there goes maybe a 57 Mercury, and he has it. See, here comes a wildebeest. Whatever it is, it comes by, and he's hungry. And so he goes after it. But what if then he stopped and thought, well, wait a minute. When's the last time? Didn't I have wildebeest for Tuesday? You do understand, if that began to happen in the primary world, very shortly, they wouldn't have to worry about lions becoming extinct because of man or because they're smoking too much. Lions would just become extinct because of them sitting around and there being a division between primary activities now and thinking about it. That is circumstance, because they'd say, do I actually want another? Do I like wildebeest that much? Who was it was telling me that down the street they had opened a deer diner? Maybe I should go down there. There are no circumstances, because circumstances are in some form, I'm using divider, but I assume you see what I mean, that there is something, a concept, a time period, it all becomes the same thing, between those activities that are life, not those activities that sustain life. Don't fall on that. You got to eat to stay alive, but at the primary level, there's no division between the two. It's insanity. It is suicide. If the primary intelligence and you are aligned, and in any way begin to question, begin to just think about, should I eat? Not at the secondary level, not about should I cut down on eating, should I go and eat at that place where my boss eats so that he'll see me and perhaps my social position. If there was any thought about should I eat, all you're saying is, should I live? There is nothing to say at that level. Therefore, there are no circumstances. There is no division, no way to say that you eat to stay alive, or that lines, or that anything at the primary intelligence level has sex. I think I'll help keep the lion race going. I don't care that much about my old lion lady or man, but I'll go do it just to help the race. It's ridiculous. There is no comment whatsoever. There is no circumstance. There's nothing else I can really say that I see that's profitable. Circumstance is a wedge. Circumstance stands between two things, two concepts, two processes. It is an interference with the seamless process of life at the primary level. Now, at the secondary level, there's nothing wrong. But it might behoove you, those of you that have hooves, to consider that in you is a level at which does not have to operate with any division, with any distance between what it does and anything that you may be thinking that you think about what it does. You have got to be dealing in the secondary world where consequences, and we're of course here on this planet, in this part of our universe, we're only talking about man. In the singular world of man is where the intellect, secondary intellect, can believe. It's made to transfer energies that has the secondary world coevally going on with the primary, and that it thinks, it accepts, that circumstances not only exist, which if we were dealing with ordinary people, I may have gotten you already so distracted again in 19 minutes that you forgot where you are, and you forgot that all of this stuff is just... Ordinary people go, well, all this is hogwash anyway. So, not only do circumstances not exist, but the secondary mind says they do exist, and is everything that does exist, but they would say specifically, and circumstances are of supreme importance. It is only secondary intelligence that can think circumstances have any influence on one's behavior, on one's life. And it goes, an easy example. It is only secondary intelligence, man, we're talking about, that can get angry and get ready to kill a clerk in a 7-Eleven store I'll cover it all because of the connections of certain circumstances. For instance, DeWitt, son of a bitch, reminds me of my father. That not only is psychologically valid nowadays, sometimes a man can walk out of the judicial system within a reasonable length of time on that basis. He's the man who sold me all of those Twinkies and ran my blood sugar up so much I almost killed my wife, and worse than that, I almost wanted to go down and join the police force. In the secondary world, there's no attack on psychology or the great men in blue. But it is accepted in psychology, it is accepted in religion, in the city is accepted by everyone, whether they believe in God or Freud. All you got to do is pin them against the wall, ask them, why did you do this? And everybody knows that somewhere in their brain, just all I got to do is get their lips open, their tongue moving, and something will come out having to do with circumstances / becauses connections. Why in the hell were you so mad? Some guy you let run in there to pick up a Coke in the store, and he comes back out and he's fuming. And the guy in there is shaking his fist and grabbing the phone like something's going on. And you realize that this guy you're with is about ready to kill somebody. Why? You don't have to believe in psychology. You don't have to believe in demon possession. You don't have to believe in anything. All you got to do is be verbal. All you got to do is have the intellect operating at the ordinary level so that you are a part of the secondary world. And there is a reason for everything that happens. And it's always tied to circumstance. And forget right or wrong. Forget that I just used, I thought was a sitting duck example to open this up. Well, you're right. I shouldn't have gotten so mad. The guy just asked for a Coke. And he pointed back there. And I didn't see him. I said, Cokes. And he pointed there. And all that was back there was Pepsi. And I said, well, damn it, do you understand English? And suddenly he said something. I'm not even sure what it was. And I looked at him, and I got real mad. And you might say, well, come on, it's just a Coke. And I know. I'll tell you what, though. It was just for a flash there. Now it struck me. He turned around, he looked at me, and he said so-and-so. And it was suddenly like my father. You know, I mentioned him. He ran off and left me when I was a kid. But it's almost 6 or 7. I can remember one time he looked, I don't know, I bet subconsciously. Now, whoever's with this guy, they might not be all that carried away with psychology, but you do understand that something like that, a ring-up circumstance, at least would keep you, if we're using you in the generic sense for my story, at least keep you from jumping out or kicking the guy out and thinking, God almighty, I've stepped into the twilight zone. You follow that you may not believe in psychology, you may think the whole idea of unconscious motivations and your father's mistreatment, you may go, let's say you're a good old down-home roofer, insurance salesman, or maintenance man with a septic tank company. Your idea of Freud and psychology may be, you know, but here goes this guy. He just started work today. He's your assistant, helping you maintain septic tanks. So he said, let me pop in and get a Coke. So he popped, and he comes out, and you just barely met the guy, and here he is, mad as hell and panting, and you can just feel, you know, this man's nervous system was about ready to kill somebody, and you look inside, and the guy in there is screaming out, and you go, what in the hell happened? You went for a Coke. And so he tells you this story. Now, if he didn't have some circumstantial story, at least a tagline, to put on, if he told you this about, well, the guy kept pointing over that one box, and there was nothing but Pepsi's in there. And there you sit, and you're a reasonable roofer. And you go, well, what the hell? You know, well, you're ready to kill it. And he says, yeah, but then, you go, but then nothing. I mean, what the hell? It looks like the guy's calling the police. You're mad enough to kill him over Cokes. And he goes, well, and then he comes out with such as, I don't know, guys like that, I guess it wasn't just the Cokes. Guys like that, sometimes they remind me of my father. Oh, I don't want to bore you. I'll tell you sometime. My father went off and left me. He was a drunk boy. He mistreated. All right, and there you sit, and you might not believe in such as that. If I took you aside later and said, you believe all that crap? And you go, no. But do listen. At least you wouldn't go, wow, this man is insane. You wouldn't got and run down the street hollering for help. As long as there seems to be a circumstantial division between what happened and what you thought should have happened. That is, well, if I said later, or if I could do it coevally, if I could jump down and say, you realize that guy he came out of there, he was almost homicidally insane. Yeah, I knew that. Well, what did he tell you? Well, first he started saying he couldn't find the Cokes, and he kept asking the guy, well, wait a minute. Are you going to drive off to work with a guy who was about to kill a stranger in there over Cokes? Well, no, I asked him. I said, and he said, well, he said that in some way when people treat him that way, especially older men, and anyway, he said the guy even resembled his father that used to mistreat him and drink. And of course, if you were telling me this, you would assume I was going to go, all right. And we both might look at each other and go, you know, a little weird, but at least you don't take it as being too abrupt. That is, you will accept the flow of this, although you may say later, you may say, you know, I'm not sure I believe in all that subconscious crap. No, you know, I've heard that on TV. But you would still let him in the truck, and you might say something like, hey, you know, calm down, remind me, you know, next time you want a Coke, I'll go in and get it. But you do here at one level, you would be well within your rights to, when the guy came out doing that, to say, hey, the boss hired you, but I'll be damned if I'm going to work with you. Get away from me. You wouldn't do that as long as there was some telling of circumstance. As long as some connection, even though you might say, I find those connections to be extremely doubtful. That is, a connection between a subconscious tumor I'm holding against my father, dead, and this guy, this stranger that wouldn't tell me exactly where the cokes were. He wasn't paying attention. You might say, your nervous system might say, I find all that highly improbable. I've heard that kind of crap before. But if I said, well, why in the world do you put up with it? Why didn't it scare you to death? You wouldn't really know why. You wouldn't. But you do hear what I'm saying, that at a certain view, at a certain non-connected, uncircumstantial view, that this stranger that you're going off to work with goes in to buy a Coke and comes out, and there's not a doubt in your mind, he may admit it, he was about on the verge of physical mayhem over a Coke. You would be just an ordinary person. Would you not be well justified to go, ooh, baby, you wait right here and you got to go get a cab or something and get away from the man. And yet, as long as he brings out some connection, secondary connection, of course he's talking about it. Even though on top of that if I jumped in and froze it all again, so wait a minute, I heard that connection, the story he gave you. Do you believe that? You might go, nah. You would still go along with the story. You would still go along with the flow. Because the secondary world is based upon connections. And all these ideas that people have is part of the confluence of different connections. Part of it is people saying, wait a minute, those kind of connections I don't believe. Really? But what you're left with is the same thing as the guy in my story. You might say, I don't believe all that subconscious crap. Now, so you're about to drive off and go to work with him. You got no answer. There's nowhere to go with that. It's because in the secondary world, everything is circumstantial, and no two circumstances seem the same to any two people. They're not supposed to. If they do, they just overlap in such a way as you don't notice it. It's like you may be hearing a hum at a certain frequency in an air conditioner. You're sitting in a club and you're dying to hear. They've revived Thelonious Monk. And there he is, and he begins to play, and this thing keeps annoying except when he'll hit certain clusters. Or when a guitar player hears a certain note, and it's the same frequency as the air conditioner, and there for a split second, you don't hear it. And if I jumped in and said, you're the one complaining about the air conditioner bothering you, yeah? Well, right then, that second, just back then, I could freeze it and move us back, and I said, you weren't complaining then. You go, what second? What second? You follow? You wouldn't have heard it. When things do overlap, when circumstances seem to two people, which does happen, because we're just talking about intersections, junctures, and people do go through the same intersection. But when they go through it over and over in the same person, nobody notices it. And so you got nothing, no circumstance puts it in any kind of perspective. Therefore, the rest of the secondary world is on the basis of circumstance, and no two people see the same circumstance as being similar. If they do, it doesn't count. Surely you follow that. Well, they don't see it. It just like it just went by. It was you hit one note on the guitar or on the piano, and it's at the same frequency as the hum of the air conditioner, and so for that split second, you're free from that. It's like a blank. A little bit further. In man's unique singular world, we also have the thing that is unique to man, as it would be to the lion, but in man's case, and that's human emotions. Human emotions exist only where there are circumstances. Human emotion can only exist where there are connections. All of the great, ever popular human emotions, guilt, shame, self-pity, sense of sin, embarrassment, envy, pride. I didn't mean just pick out negative, but once you see what they are, it's all the same. Regardless of the fact that nervous systems in the city are wired up that would naysay that and say that some of those are just basic, and they, of course you got to be fairly still tied to the secondary concept, the older concept of anthropomorphic religions and gods, but there are plenty of people around like that. I don't mean out there, in you. All of these emotions cannot exist whatsoever without there being connections. without there being circumstances. None of those emotions and any others you could name, and I just leave it to you, assuming that you are reasonable, just ordinarily intelligent in the secondary world. Anything that you would say, well, this is an emotion, charity, whatever it is. Anything you want to come up with that you said, I am absolutely convinced this is unique to man. And if that was more or less what ordinary people believe, I wouldn't question it. So use any example that you can think of at that level. None of them can exist in C. They cannot exist of and by themselves. They cannot exist in C of and by themselves. They cannot exist unconnected. All of the human emotions requires that what seems to be the emotion, which of course is electrical energy, a little chemicals and some harmonies thrown in, and in Monk's case, some disharmonies. They can only exist being connected to, I'll give you a full rundown, doesn't take long. They can only exist in connection to other parties, other groups of parties, institutions, connected to institutions, are connected to other ideas and emotions. Without somewhere in that, there is no such thing as any human emotion. That is, any secondary emotion is what we're saying. You would still have the primary emotion if we could talk about them, if we could separate them and display it, which they do operate in you, but if we could in some way display just raw, that is primary. I didn't mean that pejoratively, but primary sex is not a secondary, it is not a human emotion. Not the basis of the sex drive that you have in common with a ferret. Which is not as funny as it seems, because some years back I've seen a couple of you guys trying to pick up women at singles bars and never mind. Once you get into the secondary world, the secondary activity of man, the secondary intelligence wherein reside these human emotions, they cannot stand by themselves, they cannot exist, just period, unless they are connected. And this regardless, if you missed what I was trying to point out, older intelligence would have you, let's take a religious sense, always a easy comparison if you can hear it, that guilt, conscience, but guilt, or sin, the whole sense of sin, real religious people all over the world and all throughout the ages would say, now that is a human emotion. Animals can't sin, whatever they could say to me, what do you mean by primary world, like lions and that? All right, you're right, they can't. Only man can sin, and only man can have a sense of sin or shame or guilt. But it is something that the gods, the cosmic forces, put in us. Note, they have done just what I said. They cannot speak of, no one can, because it doesn't exist. No one can speak of human emotions in C, in and of itself, that something simply is. You cannot be guilty without being connected to something. You can be guilty of doing a particular thing if you're Jewish, but then you might go down the street. You might go down the nervous system a different direction than you if you had been different, if your genes had been different, and go down a slightly different way, and that same thing may not cause any guilt because you say, I'm an Episcopalian. But you got your own guilt. It has to be connected. If you feel ashamed, it has to be connected to another person. You cannot be, I'll stretch reality again, if you in some way grew up as a true hermit, you understand you could never be ashamed. It has to be connected. There has to be a divider between you and somebody else. In this case, if you'd never seen anybody else, even if there was a divider possible, such as the idea of circumstance, it would have never been activated. Therefore, you could never be ashamed. which is one reason that once they find hermits that have been hermits from the time they were born, is they're not very much in demand as party guests. Because if you suddenly bring them into town and the way they operate and the way they act, you can't say, oh, bad hermit, look ashamed. Well, you can't look ashamed unless you can't have any human emotion unless there are the circumstances wherein the emotion is connected. You can't feel guilty unless there's something outside of you. Apparently. That is, we're back to there's something dividing, that there's you and then there's not you. Or there's me and then there's God's will, to take the older thing. There's me and God's will as reflected by my religion, the Methodist. All right, to feel guilty, it has to be on the basis, well, yes, I do feel bad about this. I feel guilty. And whether you say it or not, what you're saying is I feel guilty because of my connection to Methodicism, or wherever the hell it would be. Protestantism. It has to be a connection. There is no human emotion. And remember, secondary, we're not talking about primary sensation. I call them sensation to differentiate it. Such as the absolute, unspeakable, seamless horniness that would be sex at the primary level. There would be sex with a ferret, and there would be sex in you at the ferret level. That is not a human emotion. It has no circumstances involved, and it is not connected with anything. You know, a ferret does not get, two ferrets are not standing around and says, boy, am I horny, and no one say, I saw you're looking at Ferret Girl magazine again. And he goes, yeah, you're right. There is no circumstance. Literally. There is no gap between a ferret being horny and a ferret being horny. There is no gap. It is only, I'm still referring, to give you a comparison again, that was the primary level of what would be emotion. And I was calling it sensation to just differentiate it verbally. But when you get into the singular world of man, any human emotion that you can come up with, any that is indeed singular to man to any degree, they do not exist in the way that sex, the drive for self-preservation at the primary level, would operate. In the secondary, you cannot have any human emotion without a connection, without there being circumstance that divides you, separates you from somebody else or from something else, the church, a theory, a philosophy, another group of people, one other person. You can only be embarrassed if there's one more person on this planet. You can only feel guilty if there is some thinking of action that's so that it can conflict or compare with your action. That is, the thinking of action, a religion, a philosophical system. Somebody from Claxton's idea of a new transcendental group. For those of you who don't know, Georgia, Claxton is where they make fruitcakes. Claxton, Georgia is the fruitcake capital of the world. So I admit that was a pretty tenuous joke, and for you people out of town, I hate for you to miss it, or I hate for you to wonder, what the hell does that mean? Now I suddenly got really a real joke, is I'm suddenly concerned that people worry about, what does that mean? There's the real joke. Well, to some of you it should be an easy jump as long as I'm here to point out the electrical basis behind all the conflicts between religions, ideas, cultures, moralities, is simply all what I was mentioning, but if you want to expand it, it's just simply on this basis. When you get down to the energy level, is that none of these ideas of morality, of religion, of what is culturally correct, what is civil, none of the ideas are in any way entities. I mean, they're not things, even though you can call it that. You can say, well, the church is a thing. The Bible is a thing. The Word of God is a thing. But it's not a thing. They're not entities. They are connections. And there's no such thing as two connections with two people that match. And if they do, you don't hear it. It's that the air conditioner is vibrating at a 440, and every time they hit an A, below middle C, you don't hear it. for a second. It just doesn't exist. I feel like too many people didn't hear that. Did I make it too complicated? All of the ideas. Moralities have been in conflict as long as you've had people. Still going on now, people arguing over religion, over even non-clerical senses of decency and morality. And everybody seems, or large groups of people, they seem to have very serious conflicts and differing opinions. The basis of it is these opinions, even they call them facts, that here's the way a person should live. A person should live like a Muslim. A person should live like an Irish freethinker. A person should live like an Albanian atheist. Whatever it is, they are taking it as they're supposed to, that this conscription, this kind of internal script I seem to have about how I should live, is an entity. Being a Jew, being a Christian is an entity. I mean, that is a something. That's the way it's supposed to be. But it's not a something. It's a connection. Because the only way you can be a Christian is to feel like there's a connection, whether it's a good one or a bad one, whether you're drifting closer or further away. There has to be a connection. There are circumstances. There's something between you and this other thing. That Christianity, living a life like Christ, living a life like Buddha, is a something, and I am closer or further away from it. I'm trying to get to it. In other words, there is a connection. But that's not a thing. The only thing that exists in the primary world is the connection between the two. In other words, all right, try it this way. Some of you are on the verge. In other words, listen right quick. Trying to be a Buddhist. You are trying to be a Buddhist. There's no such thing as a you, and there's no such thing as a Buddhist, if you can say it right quick. The only thing is the connection of you trying to do it. And of course, you can see that it's no longer valid, because then you got to turn that inside out within at least 6 dimensions and realize that just the opposite of that is equally true. And then you get to realize that both of those are now passé. In the world of connections, which is man's secondary world at the three-dimensional level, at the world of connections, there cannot be any rules which would cover morality, for instance. There can be no laws which would cover everything else. They simply cannot exist in the world of connections. All you have are temporarily agreed upon, but temporarily recognized, temporarily junctures and intersections. That's all. It is only the secondary mind, it is only secondary intelligence with ordinary people that believe that morality in some way is a rule, whether they profess to actually be living by their Jewish or Italian or Christian morality or not. They say there is such a thing. They say there is something extrinsic to man's life that is stable. And they call them either rules of conduct, morality, or they can call it laws. They can start referring to science. They could even start referring to the judicial system of their state. But they are saying that there is something external to them that in some way they're connected to, or should be, can be, gotta be. As long as they can state that it's outside of them, the connection's there. That's the folly, if you ever see it, of somebody saying, yes, I grew up being a Christian, but I wised up, I'm an atheist. I mean, to put your distance between you and anything, to give it the old stiff arm, there is no distance. You're still connected to it. I don't believe in God. I'm fine. Do you hear? Right? And not just religion. As long as you feel that there is some distance between you and something else, that it exists, that my good old equation of I plus not I equals everything. Well, that's true. There's me and then these other stuff. Some things I take to heart that are good and decent, and then other things just ridiculous, like religion or politics or whatever. You know, as long as you go, you understand? The process in there is no longer a thing. The process has become the tar baby. Now, I don't believe in that. It doesn't matter whether you believe in it or not. You're connected to it. As if you had a choice. But so by saying that you are taking one polarized view, that, well, now I know there's some people get caught up in religion. And then you start coming up with all the ills that religion has caused, and you say, well, I'm too smart for that. I stay away from stuff like that. Stay away where? I mean, you're suddenly going to jump off the planet. You're suddenly going to jump out of life's body and fly at its ear. Right. Yeah. Now, I keep my distance from that. You don't anymore. Not since you said that. Of course, that's a little long in the tooth already, because you have already said it, whether you ever said it out loud or not. You follow what I'm saying? As long as you say, oh, hey, I keep my distance from that. Oh, no, you don't. I mean, you may want to, but it's too late. You know, once you see a banana, you can't holler, I don't believe in bananas. It's too late. Or once you have been touched by the idea of religion, you can't say, hoo-hoo, I am president of the international, not the local, the International Atheist Society. I'm president. I got nothing to do with gods. A little late. Just a little late. If you can begin to see what I was pointing at, it is quite simple at the elementary electrical level of why there can be no such things as laws or rules. Now, I know in the ordinary world there apparently are, and we operate by them. At the secondary world, there's nothing wrong, etc., etc. But also notice, as we've been through many times, the laws, the rules, you cannot take to any kind of extreme. You can't say, you can't defend in any way past a certain point. Even in the city, they don't even try. It's just a waste of energy. It diffuses energy. Even the most religious of people, they say, our religion is correct. And you say, well, how do you explain the fact that half the world believes otherwise? We're trying to cure that. We're sending out missionaries. We're trying to cure it. Yeah, you've always been trying to cure it. Why is it they're ready to die? They firmly believe as well as you do that their God is correct. And of course, you know you can't go anywhere with that. You can just say, well, I don't know. We got to have faith, or I guess God will sort it out. The point being, the ordinary intellect can't perceive of this because it cannot perceive of a final episode. But what it is simply saying, without them knowing it, that there is no such thing as a rule of morality. It's not. Some are diners, some are dinners, if we was at the primary level. And that's it. At the secondary level, it seems to be otherwise, because it is connections. But you cannot take in these connections and turn it into a law. They can't ever discover the final laws of science. It just goes on and on and on. It's open-ended because it's connections. It's not laws. It's not rules. Not because I say so, but you should be able to see it. Nothing is definite. If it is definite at this level, it disappears. Death. It just disappears. It doesn't have to be just human death, but if something actually becomes definite, it has simply been worn out. Life listens and it thinks, 2,479 poor imitations of Theolonius since we called him home is enough. And suddenly, nobody is trying to play like Theolonius anymore. Few people still name their kids Spear, just out of nostalgia. Another little thing that I'll repoint your direction is that in the secondary world, what is ordinarily perceived as these connections act like a cheap, a crude form of variety. If you hadn't forgotten us talking about variety and repetition, and how each of those are proper foods, each of those are proper approaches and necessary respectively to the secondary and the primary world. What would seem to be a form of variety is really the connections of the secondary world, as opposed to there being finalities, of there being laws, facts. The connections pass as variety. Because as long as you have got like this open-end tinker toy structure going on, everybody keeps coming up and plugging in a new piece, building it this way. Everybody does know tinker toys. Little things you all keep sticking together and just going where you want to. As long as that's going on, the secondary world, secondary intelligence can take that as being a form of variety, because it is constantly changing, apparently. And, I assume in somebody's reasonable dictionary, change is listed somewhere, and a thesaurus is a synonym for variety. Don't be so easily fooled. unless you still buy your clothes and your hair pieces at Kmart, because it is a cheap version. I mean, it's workable. Life uses it. But connections, passing off, is variety. It's not much of a meal if you're trying to do something extraordinary. Because you take simply a change. You think, well, for instance, you think, well, there must be some kind of the great secret to expanding my awareness, to making myself, it's got to be hidden somewhere in religious structures, in books, or it's hidden somewhere. And you think, well, let's see, I grew up being a strict Catholic. That was the way I was brought up. And it's like I've just worn that out. I just don't have any faith in it. I'll go investigate some of the more esoteric Hindu cults. You know, maybe it's not it, but at least I've read just enough. And I'm going to go over there and check it out a little more, read some more books. I'm going to go over because it seems to be a new variety of thought. It seems to open new possibilities. But all it is a different connection. Certainly, the ideas of Hinduism in general, or some specific cult that calls itself a inner sanctum of Hindu thought, it would certainly offer a change in its thought, in its information. The connections would certainly be different than Orthodox Catholicism. But is it variety? If indeed you were after revolutionist kind of info, if you're actually trying to locate and establish a new neural building site, would that do it? And all of you should have already gone through this with no pessimism. No. It is change passing for variety. But the change is not really change. It is simply the ongoing, necessary world of connections. It doesn't stop. Social ideas, the theories of psychology, the laws, the theories of science itself. What? It goes on and on. It's progress. It's change. But it is not variety. As long as something is connected, it is not variety. I mean, what's Hinduism? It's another religion. And I can say it's completely different. There's just almost no comparisons between, if Hinduism was actually a religion, but between Hindu thought and Catholic thought. There's just almost no connection other than this. It's the same song, one played in B flat or played in D. Yeah, it sounds different. It's got some different words, but it's not variety. As long as it is connected to something, it can't be variety. It would be an abrupt change, not a change, not a connected change. It would be an abruptness. All right. How about let's press on with what I brought out, suggested a mythical, if not legendary, little picture of progress. I mentioned last time, whether you remember it or not, but here's another version of it, an extension of it. If you pictured this kind of mythical progression, it would go, another version would go like this. That you move from a land of nouns, separate, stable things and concepts, into a world of verbs, a world of connections and processes. Step forward, no doubt. But why not press on? Why weaken now? How about on to a new neural place whereon stands unsupported, naked, self-contained sentences. I would suggest to you, besides my little meaningless myths, the nervous systems, the memories, secondary memories of men all over this planet have a story that I can easily title this: The Dreamed Of Land of the Giants. You got it in the Old Testament, you got it in every religion, you got it in myths, you got it in the legends of people who seem to have very little religion except in a pagan sense. All of mythology everywhere is this dream going on today. It comes out in other ways, and Ninja Turtles and all that stuff. But when it dreams, it comes out, it's a dream of a land of giants. Let me tell you what the electrical basis of that is. I've just already set it up. The dream, this land of giants, the giants would be ideas that can stand alone. Information, intelligence that would stand alone. It would be sufficiently strong. That's what a giant represents, a Superman. But this land of giants, the giant is sufficiently strong that it needs no connections or opposition to prop it up. But notice, as tricky as that was, the land of giants would be the self-contained, like the Commodores used to be, like the Isley Brothers. They're not like Chuck Berry. They don't show up and say, "Give me a rhythm section." They got their own group. They play all their own instruments. They got their own rhythm section. The guy playing drums drives the bus. They pull up. The Commodores, the Isley Brothers, Ike and Tina Turner, back when God was smiling on the poor dears, they jump off the bus, and hey, forget they don't need anybody except the guy, come pay them the money so they can get the show on. That is what would be beyond the world of nouns and verbs. That would be the land of giants. That is what I am inferring. See, but it's not in opposition to. It's not instead of. But beyond a land which would be the beginnings of ordinary intelligence. Nouns. It would be what primary intelligence could talk about if it talked. That's where it would start. But everything is separate entities. That aligns intelligence is only interested in things. A zebra, when it's hungry, it's not interested in the latest San Francisco nouveau cuisine theories about how a zebra should be prepared. It only sees as separate things. And a little past that, a little expanded past nouns into verbs, which is where some of you are already up to. Not that you hadn't almost broken my back. But now it's a world of verbs, processes, not just things, but processes, but connections. Verbs are connections. The land of giants, it doesn't do away with that, but the land of giants, the giant would be the self-contained sentence. It needs no connection. It needs no opposition. It needs no synonym. It requires no anonym to prop it up.